Hi, this is Dr. Bishara. I'm doing part 4 of my series with H.G. Tudor, a diagnosed narcissistic psychopath. In my career as a wellness physician, I do believe that mental wellness plays a huge role in overall wellness. And so many people are involved in relationships that are toxic and not even realizing. And this is romantic, work-related, familial. So I'm really grateful for HG for providing so much input. And I'd like to continue questions for him so that he can enlighten us a little bit more about relationships and interactions with narcissistic psychopaths and narcissists as well. So HG, thank you once again for joining me. Please introduce yourself again.
Always a pleasure, Christine. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm H.G. Tudor. I operate through a pseudonym in order to keep my real identity secret, which enables me to nullify potential threats to my control, which is all part and parcel of the prime aims which I seek. What I do is explain to people, to educate them the way that my kind think, function, and operate, so that you get a proper and accurate understanding of the way that we are, so that you're not confused by the many myths that are perpetrated through various forums about us that are inaccurate, and that you gain proper understanding so that you can make informed decisions as to how you deal with those of my kind that have happened to be in your lives.
Thank you. We'll get right to it. So you're a hybrid of a narcissist and a psychopath. So you don't present exactly like a pure narcissist, which I think has more of the anxiety and that facade maintenance. But in one of the interviews that we did in the past, we did do a little comparison of psychopathy and narcissism. So if you're new watching this and you haven't seen the others, I recommend for you to watch the other videos. But what I'd like to talk to you about is the more grandiose narcissists versus the ones that are covert, which are the middle rangers in your classification. Where some people will say that the grandiose type of narcissist has more psychopathic tendencies. What do you think about that?
Well, there's always going to be an overlap, because a pure psychopath will have some narcissistic traits, but may not necessarily, won't reach the threshold to be determined as having narcissistic personality disorder. A pure narcissist may have some antisocial traits, but doesn't meet the threshold for antisocial personality disorder. And then you have me, those similar to me, where we meet the threshold for both. That's a narcissistic psychopath. So you'll have a psychopath that has some narcissistic behaviors. You'll have some narcissists that might have some antisocial behaviors. And then you have narcissistic psychopaths that reach the threshold for both. With regard to the grandiose behaviors, as you know, I don't like the terms grandiose narcissist, covert narcissist, vulnerable narcissist. I find them unhelpful. It's better to talk about the behaviors. But there are grandiose behaviors. There will be some grandiose behaviors of that particular narcissist where they may also have some antisocial behaviors also, but that doesn't necessarily always follow that a narcissist that has grandiose behaviors will also have antisocial behaviors associated with them as well. There's a real mix and match that will occur.
What about those narcissists that have that dark triad?
Well, in those circumstances, if you're talking about the sort of Machiavellianism that occurs alongside the narcissism, then what you've got to do is consider, are you talking about actual diagnosis of all three? And the fact is that there is this confluence of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and obviously psychopathy. So I fit with the dark triad because I have NPD, ASPD, and because of the calculating nature of my behaviors, you would describe my behavior as Machiavellian. Now, you could have a greater narcissist who has NPD and they're Machiavellian because they plot and plan and scheme, but they may not have psychopathy. You won't have a lesser narcissist that has Machiavellianism, but you could have one that is both. You could have a narcissistic psychopath that is a lower lesser narcissist, and he'll probably be in prison. You could have a lower lesser narcissist that has some antisocial traits, but he won't have any Machiavellianism. That's denied to him by that status. So under my system, you will find Machiavellianism with greater narcissists alongside their NPD. You might find psychopathy in there as well. So if you're going to find the dark triad, under my classification, you'd find it in greater or ultra, but not necessarily so. Under my classification, you will not find Machiavellianism amongst mid-range or lesser narcissists.
Even the upper
They
mid?
don't have it. Even upper mid-range.
Okay.
They have what I call instinctive planning, but they don't have that calculated nature that's associated with Machiavellianism.
Okay. And you mentioned criminals. What do you think most criminals are? Do you think most are lesser narcissists or lesser narcissistic psychopaths?
Most narcissists
I'm talking hardcore criminals.
So most criminals are mostly normal people that often have some mental health issues.
Yeah.
Some of those will be narcissists, but a lot of them aren't. So the fact is, we narcissists are overrepresented in the prison population. However, most criminals are not. There are more normals than there are narcissists because there are more normal people on the planet. So, for instance, a normal person, he might, because there's more of them, he might suffer an erosion of his emotional empathy because his friend's stolen some money from him, so he beats him up. So then he's convicted of assault, but he's not a narcissist.
Yeah.
You may get somebody who actually is empathic and they believe that it's wrong that homosexuality is a crime. So they protest and they engage in civil disobedience.
Yeah.
And they're arrested for a public order offence. They have a criminal conviction, but they're not a narcissist. Of course, the more outspoken ones, both on right and left, invariably are narcissists. And what tends to happen is you have the narcissist that's the leader, that's the ringleader, and there'll be other narcissists in and around them, and then a lot of normals who are swayed by that behaviour, where they wouldn't necessarily engage in the behaviour themselves, but then they are subjected to that herd mentality. So in Britain, for there to be a riot, there has to be at least 12 people acting in concert, committing a particular type of behaviour. Now, of those, they could be 12 normal people who are riled at the fact that a person of colour has been arrested and died in police custody. They feel this is another injustice against the Black community, the BME community, and therefore their emotional empathy for the police is reduced, so that they manifest their behaviour as riot.
Yeah, exactly.
None of them are narcissists. Or you could get a charismatic narcissist that stands in front on some hustings on a platform and causes people to engage in illegal strike action, which results in their criminal convictions. So the fact is, narcissists are overrepresented in the criminal population, or amongst criminals in the prison population as a proportion, but most are still normals because they're the largest population group on the planet.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm curious what you think of Charles Manson. Was he a narcissistic psychopath?
I would categorize him as such, yes.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of, I don't expect you to have the answer to this, but all his followers, I'm just curious after hearing you talk about this, is I wonder if the majority of his followers are narcissists, normals, or empaths that kind of had their emotions.
You'll get a mix, you see, because it's often very tempting to think that it's often very tempting to think that narcissists will follow narcissists, but it's not, because I see this sometimes when an unaware mid-range narcissist tries to cause trouble on my various platforms, and immediately comes along and labels all of my followers as members of a cult and all narcissists themselves. Well, they're patently not, because as a matter of statistics, they can't be.
Right.
They just can't be. And then secondly, who are the primary victims of narcissists? Empaths. Therefore, they're the ones that are going to come and access them. Sure, my work does bring narcissists. Of course it does. It brings a number of unaware narcissists. But most of the people that access my work are empathic victims of narcissists. They're genuine victims. And so what happens is a charismatic narcissist is able, by fitting in, by talking about a cause and using these manipulations, who are the most susceptible to those manipulations? Empathic people. Now, the narcissist might have the occasional attack dog, which is another narcissist to use as a lieutenant to corral those followers. But often they might have a brainwashed empath who's completely bought in to what's happened to them. And you may have come across my interviews with Doug from Dazed But Not Confused. He found that he's an empathic individual. He was sucked into Scientology. And he gives excellent insights on the constitution of the individuals that are in there. And invariably, at the top of the tree, you'll have the narcissists, or one narcissist that's the cult leader, and may have one or two others as the lieutenants. But also the lieutenants can be drawn from empaths. And as for the bulk of the followers, you'll get some normals in there, but a lot of the time, they're empathic individuals, because those are the ones that are most susceptible to the overtures of the narcissist.
Yeah. Makes
And
total.
if you think about it, how many times does an empathic victim, when they come out the other side, look back on their behavior and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe what happened to me. I can't believe what I turned into. I look back at the way I behaved and I don't really recognize myself. That's what happens as a consequence of the sustained manipulations that you're subjected to, and the combination of those manipulations allied with your emotional thinking.
Yeah, it's that erosion you talk about, right? The erosion of the emotional empathy, where you're kind of sucked in. Yeah. Yeah. Childhood wounds have such an impact on adulthood. And also another reason why I continue to do these interviews with you, because I think we're going to have an epidemic of societal narcissists in the future, because we went from, and parents are only trying to do their best. They don't realize that they're harming their child, but it's like now we have these like helicopter parents and these entitled, they're entitling their kids and putting them on a pedestal and giving them everything they want. And again, is that lack of control environment. And then you're creating another narcissist, and a lot more narcissists in the world. And we really have to step up and start educating parents about, what really raising your child is. And no one's perfect, but it bothers.
Well,
yeah.
The danger with such behavior that you've described there, it doesn't necessarily lead to a narcissist being created every time, because although you're creating a lack of control environment, of course, you need the genetic predisposition. So if there's no genetic predisposition, but an overly caring parent, misguided but honest, wraps their child in cotton wool and helicopters them, it creates a lack of control environment. And it may create a child that's narcissistic but not a narcissist, or a normal leads more towards narcissistic traits. But what it tends to do is it creates a backdrop whereby existing narcissists find it easier to move amongst everybody else. That the culture of instant gratification, now culture, I am allowed to speak my mind and you're not allowed to contradict me. I have my safe space. And that all of those behaviors, some of which come from narcissists, but some of them come from non-narcissists that are being influenced by the narcissist at the outset. Let's take, for instance, the cult of the selfie. The selfie originated from narcissists. Why? Because it's a brilliant method of asserting control over people by saying, here's me in the Grand Canyon. Here's me by the Eiffel Tower. Here's me eating a taco. Here's me on Mount Everest. Here's me at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now, once upon a time, you might get the odd picture taken where you'd say to a passing tourist, would you mind taking a picture of me or me and my wife? Thank you very much.
Right.
And then you had to stop because you ran out of roll of film. And you were saving it more for the pictures that you were taking of everything else. Now, with more or less unlimited space on the phone, or a lot of space on the phone, I should say, people then can take lots and lots of pictures, and therefore it facilitates the narcissist by allowing ease of lots and lots of pictures of themselves, combine that with social media to say, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Assertion of control, drawing good fuel. And then what happens is normal people and even some empathic people look at that and go, oh, that's quite cool. And the herd mentality prevails. Well, and of course, the narcissists, the prominent ones, they're setting the agenda. I see lots of people on social media taking pictures of themselves with that stupid duck pout, and they start following it. Why? Herd mentality. And then it creates the cult of the selfie, whereby lots and lots of people are doing it almost, well, everybody else is doing it, so why shouldn't I? Now, of course, Not all of those people are narcissists, far from it. But what's happening is that behavior, which originates from narcissists in the first instance, infects the behaviors of other people, doesn't make them narcissists, but it creates an environment which is more conducive to narcissists being able to do what we want. And that's the way the world has gone. It's producing more narcissists because the population's rising. It's producing more narcissists because we have more narcissists breeding and the lack of control environment, but it also has a more narcissistic but not narcissist society, because we are the ones that are repeatedly setting the agenda, and empathy fatigue. Because now, with the advent of 24-hour, round-the-clock television, social media, it's look at this poor person whose house has fallen down in an earthquake, look at this poor orphan who's starving. And those that have empathy, notably the normals and the empaths, it starts to become fatigued because there's this steady diet of being told, look at the woes of the world. Once upon a time, you actively had to go and find that for yourself. Now, it's thrust into your face through pin-sharp crikey vision. And for those with emotional empathy, it becomes eroded. So it starts to create this perfect storm. Those with empathy, they're not running out of it, but it's being reduced so that their own narcissistic behaviors might come to the fore, and that they regulate behavior in a different way. And society is more narcissistic as a whole, which allows my kind to get away with more.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You know, I'm thinking about you saying emotional fatigue. So, you know, when a catastrophe is reported on the news, and say, for example, a large number of people die from that, it doesn't have the same impact as the news reporting one person died from, you know, a horrible accident. And I think that's kind of, it's like you just become numb, right, to all this.
Well, once upon a time, you would only really receive sort of reported news through maybe one news channel and a newspaper.
Yeah.
And they were selective as to what they would say. So you might not know anything about what would be going on in a certain part of Southeast Asia, because basically that newspaper would think, well, it's too far from home and readers aren't going to want to, they're not interested. And we are here to sell copies. So it has, if there's a tragedy on your doorstep, now you don't have tragedies on your doorstep every single day. You don't in your local community. But take, for instance, the mass shootings in the United States. True. There's a website that you can go on that lists them all.
Yeah.
They happen every single day, whether it's a father who's mentally unwell, who shoots his wife, shoots his children and turns the gun on himself. That's recorded as a mass shooting. Or somebody who walks into Walmart and opens fire. Now, not all of those are reported across national news. Why? Because they happen so often. But if you go and look for this information, which you're more able to do so because of social media and the internet, you'll see actually that all of these problems have existed for quite a long time. Indeed, the world is not as violent as it once was. Yeah. It's the perception of it being more violent because we have a greater access to the news that shows us this. You can go and find it more readily. Once upon a time, if you wanted to know what's going on in Southeast Asia, you'd either have to ring a friend that lived there and incur huge telephone charges, or you'd have to get on a plane and fly out there. Now, you just go to the internet.
Yeah, really good point. You're right. Absolutely. And I, you know, I don't know if that's good or bad. I just feel like we have this exposure to a narcissistic society now where it's kind of breeding more little narcissists. So anyway, speaking of narcissism, it's a cluster B. If anyone's interested in the DSM, it's classified in one of the cluster B personalities. I'm personally fascinated by the cluster Bs. Borderline personality disorder is very similar to narcissism. For me, I feel like they're very similar, but they're maybe a little more needy and codependent. But I know you have a different classification for borderlines. You don't really think that is a specific. Well, tell me what you think what you think borderlines are.
Well, as you touched upon, borderline finds itself in cluster B alongside narcissistic personality disorder. So it finds itself sat there and has that classification. And of course, the way that I view it is that with borderline, some of those people are actually individuals who are misdiagnosed and they have post-traumatic stress disorder. And they ought not to be described as borderlines. And then the other borderlines are actually narcissists. And what it is it is a gender-biased determination. If you call somebody a narcissist, it's stigmatic. It's not a compliment. And in society, most borderlines tend to be women. And in society, it wants to believe that women are empathic, maturing, maternal, caring. Doesn't like the idea of a steely-eyed dealer of death that's uncaring and unfeeling. That role is largely, well, it's changed a little bit, it's largely left to men. And the idea of a narcissist in the narrow version in the DSM is essentially that individual who thinks that he is going to change the planet, that he's absolutely obsessed with his looks, that he's preoccupied with stamping on everybody around him and getting to the top, that he thinks he's drop dead gorgeous, brilliant at what he does, even though he actually isn't, and spends all of this time being dismissive of individuals and so forth. That is just one flavor of narcissist. And it basically accords more with the sort of alpha male concept. And that doesn't really describe many females. But rather than label females as narcissists because it's stigmatic, the female narcissists instead receive borderline, because with a borderline, they invariably will say, I can't help what I do. I know that I'm horrible. I know I do horrible things to people, but it's not my fault. It's the borderline. That's blame shifting. They're blaming something else. If they know what they're doing causes a problem, stop it. But they don't. They go, I can't help it. They claim to have emotional empathy. That's what mid-range narcissists do. Mid-range narcissists blame shift. It's my demons. There's a chemical imbalance. You made me do it. Lessers, they basically lie. I don't give a fuck. I just get on with it. But mid-range narcissists, it's always somebody else's fault or something else's fault. And that's what borderlines do. Borderlines think they've got emotional empathy. So do mid-rangers. Borderliners don't have any accountability for their behavior, similar to the narcissist. Their behavior shows they have no emotional empathy because they keep repeating the same behavior in the way that a narcissist does. So it's very clear to me that borderline ought to be gotten rid of. And those individuals are actually narcissists. And there's a proportion of them who have been misdiagnosed. They're people with post-traumatic stress disorder and aren't borderlines, and we should get rid of it. And I have a video, The Borderline, which goes into even more detail about all of this.
That's actually really interesting. And what you're saying would actually explain why certain borderlines are able to get better, right? Those are probably the ones that actually have PTSD.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's the general wisdom is narcissists can't change. Borderlines, there's some hope for them. And again, where those ones who have effected change, they're not actually, they're non-narcissists. And they've got post-traumatic stress disorder because of what has occurred to them. And then the other ones where there's no change, they're actually narcissists, but they're called borderline. And the problem is, I remember many years ago when I was first writing about narcissism, and somebody commented on my blog, oh my goodness me, I don't want to meet a borderline. They're even worse than narcissists. And actually, in fact, no, it's just a different type of narcissist. You touched upon it, you know, the neediness that goes with it. So rather than being this sort of thrusting, the world can go F itself, you know, I eat what I kill, look at me, they're more like, don't leave me, and why are you being so mean to me, and please stay with me, etc. And often some people find that much more hard work than somebody who's actually thrusting and dismissive.
Would you think like most people label borderlines are like mid-range narcissists that are kind of like that fake facade?
Yeah, they are. Yeah. So where you've got a borderline who is not somebody with PTSD, they would fall within the categorization of some form of mid-range narcissist because they feign emotional empathy. They believe they have it, but they don't. Their behavior shows that they don't. They engage in behaviors over and over again that they have no accountability for, but they do recognize that they're doing wrong things. I know it upsets you when I shout and scream at you. I just can't help it. I'm a borderline.
Yeah.
Well, stop. If you know you're doing it, stop it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But every time you say that to them, they'll go, but I can't help it. Actually, well, that's your narcissism talking. Because when I say to you, take accountability, I'm threatening your innate need for control. So your narcissism immediately responds by going, but I can't do anything about it. I'm a borderline. And that's you rejecting my threat to control.
Yeah. And that clarifies a lot, because I know several people where, you know, I was never sure, are they borderlines or are they narcissists, because there is that overlap, but that actually, good clarification on that. Thank you. So we don't have much time, HG, but I'd love to get a little bit more kind of insight on you. You have this huge following. You have, I think at this point, like over 140,000 followers on YouTube. And your website, narcsite.com. And I know you have your knowledge vault, and so many people have access to your work, but no one knows who you are. So are you worried that someone in your private life, or someone that you know intimately or at work, kind of stumbles upon your work and says, hey, you know what, that voice sounds familiar, or wait a second?
No, this is my voice that you can hear. The reason I'm not concerned by that is, first of all, although I have a lot of followers across the various platforms, as a percentage of the people on the planet, it's still pretty small. So as a matter of statistics, now that will go on. Now, there's a possibility that someone could come across it that knows me. So let's say, for instance, I'm called John Smith. I'm not, but we'll use that. Somebody might listen to watch one of my videos and go, and they might just think, you know, that sounds a bit like John. But they won't have any certainty, and here's why. First of all, they'll have a disconnect between the person that presents themselves to them and what they're hearing about. Secondly, although I talk about all the various things that have happened in my life, of course, I change names, I change the order of events, so certain things won't quite fit. Thirdly, I alter the pronunciation of certain words ever so slightly that would throw people off, so it would create uncertainty. And generally, if you think, for instance, that your friend, etc., a family member or former boyfriend is a narcissistic psychopath, you'd rather not contemplate that was the case. So your mind is fighting against that, and it's much easier to go, nah, that's not him, than accept the reality of, actually, that is him. Also, I'm not concerned by it, because although, of course, there have been people in my former relationships who had an inkling that there was something not quite right about me, as one would say, or even in certain instances have used the labels to describe me, they would know far better than to go shouting out from the rooftops and say, actually, this is John Smith.
Good point. You have that evil streak. Very good point.
Well, yeah, some people perceive it as evil. I just see it as being effective.
Yes, survival of the fittest, HG.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's going on with you? Are you currently in a relationship, and do you have romantic partners? And if so, I'm assuming they have no clue as to who you are.
Yes, I have a girlfriend, so I have a romantic relationship, and the individual concerned knows that I have an edge, if I can describe it that way, but doesn't know what I am. And it's not the case that we spend oodles of time together because of what we both do professionally. So it provides the opportunity to be together, but with orbits that aren't sort of folded in within one another, which means that the potential for devaluation is staved off to a greater degree, because it doesn't create the boredom that's ordinarily there. So, and the individual concerned certainly is able to conduct herself in a particular way, where I think probably she has repeated dealings with my kind, but perhaps doesn't realize it. And I think that kind of shapes the way that she functions and operates with me. So a sort of analogy would be with the late Queen Elizabeth II. She may not ever know that she dealt with narcissists, but she will have done repeatedly by virtue of who she is. And she learned how to deal with them in a particular way. And so with my girlfriend, I know for a fact, because of what she does, that she has dealt with my kind in other arenas. And it seems to me that kind of shapes her behavior a little bit towards me also, which means that she's not going to threaten my control in a way that somebody who had less understanding of such matters without fully knowing what it is they're dealing with would.
Is she an empath?
Yes.
What kind of empath do you think she is?
Super magnet.
Okay, very interesting. So graders are more attracted to the supers, right?
All narcissists are attracted to super empaths, but of course, those lower down the scale struggle to control them.
Makes sense. And do you have an intimate partner secondary source?
Not one that I'm currently knocking her hip out, no. Although there are ones which are shelved.
I see. And do you know how many you have shelved right now? Curious.
Well, theoretically, that's any intimate partner secondary source that I've ever had Ugandan affairs, discussed Ugandan affairs with. So we'd be talking a lot.
Right.
Because they are all theoretically shelved. There are some that I deal with, but in a non-intimate way. So there are some that I know through various circles that intermittently I will take off the shelf and have a dealing with, but I don't deal with them at the current time in an intimate way.
And I hope you don't mind that I'm asking all these questions. I'm just very curious, but
No.
No. Okay, good. Do you get your main source of fuel from negative interactions with your IPPS or positive interactions?
It's probably, it's still more, generally speaking, positive. There are times where there is negative fuel that comes from her. But also remember, because I'm a hybrid, my fuel needs aren't as high as a pure narcissist.
Yeah.
So I'm able to have sustained periods of where I'm just knocking along, doing my own thing, which suits me given what I do professionally as well. So I do have to receive fuel from people, and most days I have an interaction with people. But there are periods of time where I am away from people, including her, and that doesn't cause a problem for me. And therefore, when there is that dynamic of coming together, it's mainly in a positive way. Therefore, I receive positive fuel.
Okay. And one more question. What's your favorite form of devaluation?
I don't have a favorite per se. It depends upon who I'm dealing with, because I have certain ways that I'll deal with romantic partners, with friends, with family members, and then those secondary sources, for instance, that operate in my other spheres of interest that I have. So I wouldn't say that I necessarily have a favorite. Okay. I apply certain devaluations dependent on circumstances.
Fair enough. Thank you again, HG. It was a pleasure as always.
You're most welcome. Thank you for inviting me on.
No problem.